The beginning of the journey was phenomenal. It was great. It was exciting to see what, the future could hold. And I know for me personally, like the beginning was the most excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And it might have went and shifted not long after that. But the beginning was the best.
I've been in ministry just about my whole life. And so it wasn't really anything just breathtakingly new. I've been around ministry. My dad taught in the church. And so for me that it was still exciting, but it wasn't just anything brand new.
So for us, we would operate in our own strength, just in the fact that, like, if there was something I wanted to do in church, you can bank I was going to go behind the scenes, make sure that I had everybody on board that I needed to before a vote came up. And so it wasn't that God was leading, it was that I was just wanting to do something and I forced it to happen. To where now we operate in God's anointing and in God's favor and in His timing. And it is so much better now than when we forced things to happen.
It was a very corrupt way of going, for sure. It's much, much smoother and much easier now, and you can tell the anointing of God is on it. That was one of the hardest things to go through. That made ministry very difficult, and that was just the tip of the iceberg for what was to come in our future.
So to be betrayed, it was with people. It was with friends. People that you thought were your best friend, to find out the whole time they were friends to your face, they were behind the scenes trying to get rid of you, was just devastating.
It was tough.
Giving somebody your heart in love and then watching them crush it had to be the worst thing ever. And it impacted us both so much in ministry that we wanted out and never wanted anything else to do with ministry.
I mean, we were at the point that we didn't even want to go to church on Sunday morning anymore. I mean, it had gotten that bad that, it wasn't even a decision anymore. It was just we didn't even want to go to church.
And personally, we didn't want anything to do with God.
Mm-mm.
Like, it wasn't just going to church and being around people. It was personally,
Day to day, every day.
yeah, I didn't want God to have anything to do with me. Because for us, if that's what the best Christianity was and the best that God had was what we had just experienced with corrupt systems and people, then I didn't want any part of it.
Yeah, if that's what ministry looked like, then we were done with it.
I don't know. I didn't discover Church of the King. My wife did.
Church of the King was a breath of fresh air. I mean, it was big time. That it gave a whole new meaning to our ministry and really got us back into that groove of wanting to be closer to God and wanting to learn more and getting back into that worship mode.
So for us, like when we walked in Church of the King the first time, I remember we walked in the back row, first seats we could find. And it was, you're in this large church with a lot of people. And there was, just us. We didn't know anybody. We were right off the street. And I remember there was an older couple sitting right in front of us. And in the middle of worship, he turns around and looks at me and says, I don't know why God wanted me to do this at this particular time, but He wanted me to tell you my name and we're glad that you're here. And then right after that, Tabatha goes to another service by herself because I still wasn't convinced yet. I'm like,
Yeah, I went to a First Wednesday service and I connected with a lady and I was sold from there. I mean, it was just, I knew that's where we needed to be. And I went back and told Kevin, this is home.
So for us, we came out of ministry. My dad had been in ministry for 30 years. And so to see us live in the same community as them and go to a church somewhere else was hard on my family. they understood, but it was still hard. And so one day my dad came to me, and through tears, he said, Kevin, I'm struggling and I really need help. I really want to bring the church further than where they are, but I can't do it alone. And so for us, it was, leaving a church that we loved and a pastor that we loved to go back and help the family that we love.
It was tough. It was very tough.
So, Tabatha, what motivated you to make the decision to go back?
Knowing that's what God wanted, knowing that's where we needed to be, you could feel a peace about it, even though in the back of your mind, the church hurt was still there, but there was a peace knowing that's where we needed to be.
So for us, coming out of a church that was very traditional, to step into Church of the King, where they're talking about breaking free and getting free from bondage and stuff in your life, we at first were like, I don't know about all this.
This is not for me.
But then through people in the church and seeing and talking to people in the church and seeing a different perspective in people, it began to put a hunger inside of us that was like, okay, what is different? What's going on that they have that we never did? And finally, one day, we realized that they're walking in freedom that we haven't experienced. And so for us, I think one of the things that we experienced most was even the outward expression of worship in our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had people that have come up to me and say that because of your outward expression of worship, I have felt more comfortable to develop my own outward expression of worship. And that means a lot. That it makes you feel really good inside that you are doing what God has called you to do, and it is impacting others.
So I remember when we were at the church, we had stepped out of Church of the King, we were back in Reeves, and I remember me and Tabatha talking like, man, we just miss Church of the King so much. We miss Pastor Todd and Miss Lisa. We just miss all the people that we had there, the friends. And then the Hurricane Laura hit. And we're in Reeves, and Reeves is tore up, and we're trying to get supplies to people and stuff. And I remember walking through the church one day, and Tabatha and then we're there, and Pastor Todd calls my phone. And I'm like, look who it is. And so I answer it, and it was so short and sweet. It was like, hey, man, are y'all okay? And I'm like, yes. And he said, well, look, I'm going to be sending supplies to you guys to give out and stuff, and we need to reconnect. And so through that, we reconnected. And we began to talk about, man, I really wish we could do ministry where we are, but with you guys. And Pastor Todd said, well, why can't we? And so we began to do, strategic partnerships and stuff, and just the knowledge of being able to call on Pastor Josh or Pastor Todd or people in the church and ask questions and get guidance and mentorship was just the greatest thing. And then one day I remember asking Pastor Todd, I'm like, okay, this is great. What about if we just took it another step? And Pastor Todd said, like, y'all be a campus? And I said, that's it. That is what God is wanting. He's wanting us to become a campus. And that's when Church of the King Kinder began to be birthed. So my faith helped me to get over those challenges because I've seen God work so much in the past. And even through our church hurt, I knew God was working. I just didn't want to admit it. And so watching him work so much in the past strengthened my faith that he had me then, he's going to have us in the future. And so looking back and seeing all of what he's done, and then looking and saying, God has been good every step of the way. God never failed us. We just stepped away from God. And so getting back and seeing his goodness and all of what he's doing, it brought a fire in us to say, we can do this. God is in this.
So yeah, coming from a place of church hurt and all the movement that we did, moving from Reeves to Texas to Lake Charles back to Reeves, just that full circle of seeing God's goodness and how he finally planted us where we're supposed to be, and feeling that peace that this is where we're supposed to be is awesome.
So for me, the best is yet to come has always been something that's dear to me, because I look at it as if the past was this good, just imagine what God has for the future. And the future is going to be spectacular, because if he was that good back then, he's going to be even better in the future.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, just if the past was as good as it was, and even through the church hurt, it was still good, and you could still see God's hand. I can just imagine what the future is going to have.
So for, making the move to Kinder was already, a lot of what ifs. Now we're looking at, we've outgrown the first place that we've gotten to. And we're all high-fiving, saying how good God is and everything, but what are we going to do for a second place? And then God sparks a phone call between me and the current owner of the location we're at, and he calls me and is like, hey, have you thought about my building? I'm like, no, I haven't. So we transfer over to this one. It's a larger facility. And we're like, hey, that's great. We're high-fiving again. And then it's like, oh, we're fixing to outgrow this one, and we really need to get a home. So what are we going to do? And so everybody began to pray. And the next thing you know, within less than a year, we have moved 2 locations and purchased our 3rd and final location, and are going to be hopefully getting in that by the end of 2024. You can't look back and say that God hasn't been good and that the best is not yet to come.